Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us to Tales from Digital Transformation. My name is Rafa Halawi. I'm the digital marketer at 3Pillar Global. I wanted to go through some housekeeping items before handing it over to our experts today. Audio is streaming through your computer. The webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording in the next day or two. The slides are available for download at any time through your control panel in the handouts selection. So if you go there, you can download them at any time throughout the webinar. All attendees are muted throughout the webinar, but we do want to hear from you. So please type in your questions in the questions box on your control panel, and our presenters will be happy to answer all of them at the end of the presentation. If they do not get to your question, you will receive an email with the answer in the next day or two. Now, without further ado, I do want to present our first presenter, Scott Varho. He is the Senior Vice President of Product Development at 3Pillar Global. Scott has spent close to 20 years working in leading fast-paced delivery teams accountable for building products that support core business objectives. Before joining 3Pillar Global, he was the VP of Product and Technology at Interfolio, the Vice President of Product Development at Everfi, and Executive Product Manager for Identity and Access Management at Pearson Education. His passion lies in building cultures that sustain high-performing teams optimized for return on investment for clients through a product mindset, craftsmanship, collaboration, and technology. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. So by way of introduction, I'm going to introduce our second speaker here today, Jonathan Rivers. Jonathan and I had the opportunity to work together here at 3Pillar for about a year before he moved into his current role leading Fortune through what one might call a rapid digital transformation, near hockey stick level digital transformation. And Jonathan arrived at Fortune after Meredith sold Fortune and joined a leadership team that was devoid of technology leadership, and who was told they had to migrate off the Meredith platform in a rapid and fixed time frame and build a new technology, a digital home. This is actually the latest of several digital transformations that Jonathan has led or played a load-bearing leadership role within, previously at PBS and the Telegraph. And while each of these experiences are clearly media experiences, I can personally attest that the insights that Jonathan has accrued through those experiences extend beyond media context and are applicable more broadly. My own background is in telecom, in telecommunications, education technology, and software as a service. So in terms of the genesis of this particular topic, we recently asked Jonathan, based on his experience, if he had sort of a playbook or a framing for how he thinks about and approaches digital transformation. And he said no, and then talked for about 45 minutes about his approaches to digital transformation. And so we asked him to come here and talk about what that experience, his intuition and keen mind have led him naturally to in terms of how to do that and how to do it well. So Jonathan, to get you started, I'm gonna start you off with a question. You and I talked about together while we were here at 3Pillar about the need to draw a bright line between innovation and invention. And so I want to start you off with, how do you draw that line, and why is that an important aspect of the bigger digital transformation concept?
Thanks, Scott. And it's great to be here, and thanks for having me. And I think understanding the difference between innovation and invention is the start of any transformation, right? So if you're trying to transform a company, a department, an organization, sort of a product, you're aiming for innovation, and it's critical to know the difference between the two. And I think you summed it up best years ago, which is that the difference between innovation or invention is that innovation creates value. And I like to use the example of the Segway to sort of illustrate that, right? So the Segway, this crazy self-balancing scooter, is merely an invention. It didn't innovate anything. It didn't change the market. It really created no value. All it did was change walking tours in capital cities. I mean, that's not exactly that big a deal. I mean, people put on helmets and drive around and see some landmarks. You can walk to do that. You would pay either way because you're really paying for the tour guide. So it didn't really create a significant amount of value. And that's what true innovation does. True innovation is about creating value where it didn't. And so when you're going in to a transformation job and you know that you've got to innovate, there are sort of two things that I always tell people to keep in mind. The first is making sure that your innovation is aligned with the strategy. What new markets are you trying to get into? What parts of the business are you trying to change? If you don't really focus on how the work that you're doing aligns with corporate strategy, you're likely to fall into invention. You're just going to be trying to think of new things, and new for new's sake is no good, right? New in and of itself doesn't create value. Something to have value has to be aligned with strategy that's going to have an organization behind it. The second is to ask very, very early on the time horizon and the level of impact that's supposed to come out of this innovation. You need to know how long you have, because that can really sort of guide how quickly you have to move, how much time you can spend learning, how much research you can do. Understanding how much runway you have. All businesses are funded. All businesses have limited sort of assets. I often say the most precious asset any company has is time. Time is linear and finite. We can't get that back. And so having a good understanding of the horizon is going to be incredibly essential. And the final, and I think where I've sort of departed from where you and I have talked about innovation versus invention years ago, is that I've come to believe that real innovation is a force multiplier, right? It does something much, much more important. And so let's go back to invention of the Segway, right? That isn't a force multiplier, really. It just changed walking tours and mall cops. If you think about the cell phone or the smartphone very specifically is a true innovation, because not only did it create a market for larger and more expensive luxury phones when everybody was trying to make the phones smaller and cheaper, it also spawned entire ecosystems. There are now hundreds of thousands of phone cases and little pop-up thingies that allow you to hold on to your phone. It created all of the app stores. It created mobile gaming. There is now an entire suite of businesses all based around the invention of the smartphone. And that's true innovation. It changed the way everybody exists. It changed markets. It changed everybody's lives. And that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And so,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask, like, so how do you lead through that process?
I think one of the first things that you have to be really, really aware of is that you're in fact from the future, and this is critical to understand, because it will impact your odds of success greatly. So the science fiction author or Arthur C. Clarke has 3 laws, and the third law is that any technology sufficiently advanced is akin to magic. And I take that to heart when looking at transformation, because you're going to be using an entire set of language and talking about an entire suite of things that people in your company don't understand, or that is incredibly foreign to them. You're going to have insights that others don't have, right? This is what you do for a living, and it's not necessarily what the company that you come to does for a living. Otherwise, they wouldn't have called. And so that sets you up into a really dangerous space when you're doing this, because a lot of things are going to come very, very natural to you, and you know deep down why you need to make all of the moves that you want to make. But you've got to be really patient. And I think I stress this so much, to folks that I'm talking to who are getting started in these jobs. A lot of it's an education job. You're going to have to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's going to seem sort of bothersome. It's going to seem painful, but a lot of your intuitions are going to be very natural to you, because you've got 10, 15, 20 years experience in sort of digital or web. You have a significant amount of experience, and things are going to be obvious to you. That's why they called you, right? The fact that things are obvious to you is why you got the phone call. That doesn't mean they understand them either. And so you want to spend a lot of time explaining the math. And I've made that mistake a number of times. Trust me, I got this. You called me. I know this, right? I'm the expert, and that all that's going to do is create hostility and make getting to your goal a lot more difficult. And so I really stress sort of being very, very patient, and walking through people all of your decisions, making sure they understand why you did it, the factors that have gone into it, and making it patently clear. Because finally, I mean, look, your intuition looks like magic. I started with the Arthur C. Clarke, sort of law. Mm-hmm. Things are going to be obvious, and nobody's going to know how you got there. And being really respectful of that is going to increase your odds of success so greatly, because even though you got the phone call, a lot of people are going to resent your presence there, and you want to disarm them if you can. But you need to know that that resentment is going to be there. And that leads me to my next point, Scott, which is, when you get into one of these jobs, there's going to be a lot of resentment. There's going to be a lot of resistance, and there are going to be naysayers. And I promise you, they are going to line up a mile deep. The naysayers are going to, I mean, there will be a line coming out your door of people who have come to tell you that it won't work. Right? That's going to be the first line of people that's going to say this won't work. The second line of people are going to tell you how they've already tried it and that failed as well, and that your ideas aren't new. And so these groups are going to line up, these constituents, and they'll make themselves fairly well known. There may be some hidden ones, and we'll talk about some of those. But the hater squad will come out very, very quickly and attack you in a very sort of public way, or try and get in the way of the transformation. And I'll tell you to ignore them, right? Just flat out ignore them. There's a sort of a customer service theory, or sort of a business metric called Net Promoter Score that companies use to track their progress. And that buckets their customers into three different groups: promoters, neutrals, and I forget, sort of disparagers or dissenters. And you have those three buckets, and I'm here to tell you, and most companies will tell you that you can spend an awful lot of energy on a hater and not move them. You are much better off finding your promoters and finding your neutrals, right? Because you're not, it's much easier to move a neutral into a promoter. You're going to get more economy for the effort that you're spending, and really see the results, right? So people who are going to disparage you, or people who don't believe, you're not going to convince them. They have already made up their minds. That's why they lined up at your door, to tell you that it's not going to work. And if you spend a lot of time and energy trying to move them just even into a neutral, that's time when you could have been building promoters, and really want to sort of focus on that. And I think one of the things that I tell people who are even in that neutral space, but tell me that things aren't going to work, or we've tried that before, is about Leibniz's theory of identity. And I know I'm going from science fiction authors to physicists and philosophers, but I think it's particularly important. And so Leibniz has his theory of identity, and it goes like this: for things to be identical, they have to share all properties in common. And that sounds pretty self-evident, right? This doesn't sound like something that groundbreaking, but it really is. And when you have those dissenters or those promoters who are telling you it won't work, or that they've tried it before, point that out, right? So for things to be identical, they have to have all properties in common. And if it's a company and they tried something before, I can guarantee you, when you're trying it, even if they've tried it before, people have left, new people have joined, market conditions have changed. The two situations are no longer identical, and you want to hold yourself to that, right? You know that things are different. They know that they have tried it. You might want to look at what they tried and why it failed, Absolutely. But you know that things are different and you want to remind people of that. And then finally, again, I've said it a couple of times, but identify the forces of good. Identify the people who want change, find them very rapidly, and ally with them. They've been there a lot longer than you. They have much more information on the ground. They're going to have doors that they can open for you. Finding the promoters, finding the change agents is one of the most critical things that you can do. Don't get sucked into the drama. Find the people who want change and really rally them to your cause. And I think that leads in really well to my next point, because rallying the change agents to the cause needs a North Star. And I've done this often, and the notion of a North Star is, I think, for me, really critical. There was an engineer who I worked with a year or two ago, who, before he started any project, would come to me and ask me a series of questions to try and help him derive at the North Star that he needed for his approach to that project. What was the one thing that he needed to solve? What was the most important thing? And that's what the North Star is. What is the one thing? The one thing. If you do nothing else, what is the one thing? And having a one thing is powerful, right? It can create that rallying cry that you need to unify people. But it also makes for very clear messaging. If you can come up with one thing that you're doing, it's incredibly, sort of helpful. It gives people a way to know what to do when they don't know what to do. This transformation is going to be a lot of change, and change is very, very hard. If change were easier, more of us would do it more often. And so trying to remember why they're changing or what you're transforming to is going to be important, because people are going to have to make decisions day in, day out. They're not going to be able to run these decisions by you. If you're doing it right, they shouldn't be running the individual decisions by you. You should be building from the ground up and having people operating in an autonomous fashion pointed to that North Star. If you have clearly articulated it, they will know what to do when you're not around to answer a question, when the obvious solution is not apparent. They can say, am I moving one step closer to this North Star? And that's a critical thing to do. And then the other part is why it's the most important, right? Understanding why this thing is so vastly important that they do it. And that really gets to the why. When you start thinking about digital transformation, or just sort of where the industry is, normally the what is, okay, we need to transform because we're going out of business. The markets have changed. We are no longer connected to the markets. We need to connect to the market. And so that's a very simple why, but that's not exactly something that people can get behind and they can take action towards. If you're telling them what this North Star is and why it in particular is important for transformation, they can sort of get behind it. Here at Fortune, we're talking about, that North Star is, we need to become a media company with multiple distribution channels rather than a magazine with a website. And that's a pretty clear example, right? The North Star, we really need to become a media company with robust distribution channels, right? That's the what we're going to do, and why it's important is so that we've diversified revenue, so that we have new ways to go to the market. And that sort of North Star gives people the ability to act in an autonomous fashion, and that is really where you start gaining, traction and moving on. And so I think with that, I'm going to go back to some of the naysayers and those detractors. That was the term I was looking for. Oh, it's killing me. Yeah. So my brain could not remember for the life of me. I thought you were going to shout it out at me, Scott, but I didn't get a lifesaver on that one. So when you have those detractors that haven't made themselves known, you're going to run into a concept that I call permafrost. And permafrost is pretty insidious, and it's one of the things that stops most transformation jobs dead in their tracks, right? So permafrost is that layer of frozen ground. So if you think about the Russian tundra, for example, you have a layer of frozen soil about 6 inches down that is frozen year round. And the warmth from the sun can't get through it to the seeds that are underneath it that want to grow. And so nothing happens. And I'm here to tell you that permafrost exists in companies like the day is long, and that's what stops things. And I used to think that permafrost was just people, right? I used to think permafrost was just this, I used to describe it as this layer of middle management or this layer of senior management that will stop all change. I have subsequently come to believe that it could also be culture, right? So a company culture can be the one that stops it from innovating. I think it's interesting. Satya Nadella of Microsoft fame has talked a lot about how he's changing Microsoft from being a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. And that right there is a really great example of cultural permafrost. That know-it-all company that Microsoft was sort of in the 90s and the early 2000s was really holding it back and keeping it from innovating and keeping it growing. And if you look at what's happening under his leadership in that change of culture, it's a perfect example of how a cultural transformation can unlock that kind of innovation. And so when you're dealing with this permafrost and you're trying to push this change, one of the things I try to make people mindful of or sort of caution you about is that change devalues experience. And this is an interesting concept, and it's pretty deep. And if you think about it and think about your own organizations and what you're doing, especially in the technology world, people identify with the tools that they use. They identify with their job routines, and they identify with how they do their job. If you take somebody who has 10 years of experience using a particular CRM system, and you change that CRM system, right? You go from Dynamics to Salesforce, let's say. Many cases, that person feels like they go from 10 years of experience to 0 years of experience. They're applying their identity to the tool that they're using. And if you tell somebody who has 10 years of experience, you're resetting them at 0 years of experience, they are going to fight your change tooth and nail. They are going to do everything they can actively and passively to stop you from changing that system, right? They're not thinking about they're in sales operations. They're not thinking that they're in customer support. They're thinking that they're no longer going to know how to do their job. Their job wasn't actually using the CRM, right? That's a proxy for it. Their job was actually facilitating deals. It was actually helping customers. It was absolutely making sure that the business worked. And people forget that because they get attached to the computer and knowing how to do their job. And that's a big trap, right? Suggesting that I'm going to implement this system, whatever it is, it could be a website, it could be a process, anything that you're trying to do to innovate, to create that radical transformation, you're going to take years of experience away from somebody. You're going to take domain experience away from them, and they're not going to react positively. And you need to be really sort of sensitive about that. And sort of mindful that they are going to resist a significant amount of that change. And when dealing with the permafrost, I used to always say, when you see it, burn it out with fire. And that's some of my personality sometimes, and sort of an easy thing for me to do. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he pointed out, what about those seeds, right? That example that you gave about how there are seeds under that layer of permafrost. Don't you want to see if they're any good, if they're valuable, right? They might just be weeds, but they could be an apple tree. And so I now say, once you've identified that permafrost, and it's something you should look for very, very quickly, inspect it, right? Inspect it very closely and figure out if there are valuable things in there And if there are, spend the time to lift and educate, right? This is a place where if you see value, you absolutely need to invest in unlocking that. The best thing that you can do in any transformation job is unlock the resources that are already there. Utilize the people that are there, the things that are there. It's going to make the job go much more smoothly, and you'll be much better received for it. So if there are things valuable there, warm it gently, right? Warm that ice very, very gently, lift it up, talk to them about that North Star, why you're making those changes, walk them through it, do it again very, very patiently, show them the math like I was talking about. And then there's the other set. And I will maintain my position about sort of, burning things out with fire if you have to. If you find that level of permafrost and they are bad guys and they are actively resisting change, take care of it. Do not wait. Do not think it's going to get better, because they will stymie your actions. They will do it in public. They will do it in private. And if you let it linger, and you let it sit around, you are not going to achieve the change that you were brought in to do. And it's important, and I love, the set the tone, slide when we're talking about that. And I say burn it out with fire because I like to use bold, fun language. But I think how you do it really, really matters. And I've said this for years, and I hold myself to it all of the time. Culture is set by the worst behaviors its leaders will tolerate. And that's really, really sort of critical when you're setting a culture, and you will be setting a culture, right? Innovation is a culture. Transformation is a culture. The behavior that you tolerate is going to be replicated by people much lower in the organization years and years and years ago. I found out that some of the permafrost was my own team. Like the team I had inherited had a group of bad actors in it, and they were stymieing all of the growth. And the worst part I realized once I found it is that by allowing them to misbehave, I was tacitly endorsing their behavior. I was saying that it was acceptable. And you need to think about that as you're going into organizations and as you're maybe building a new organization. If you inherit one, the behaviors of your teams are going to reflect on you, and they're going to have an effect on how your change goes through. And so it's really critical to set the tone, and it should be a positive tone. It should be one of innovation. It should be one of growth. It should be one of, we are trying to do something really, really rad here. And you need to become a broken record. I talked about, here at Fortune, we talk about becoming a media company with many, many distribution channels instead of a magazine with a website. I'm going to say that until I am blue in the face, till people report it back or repeat it back to me, or till somebody tells me to stop it. You can't say these things too much. I talked about educating and sort of showing the math. Really talking about what you're doing is just as important as doing it, and making sure that you get out and everybody understands what your approach is, why it matters, and what you're doing. And then again, find those promoters, find those people in the organization who are inspired by your particular brand of madness, these crazy innovative things that you want to do, and then arm them with that North Star, arm them with all of the ideas, and set them forth. Because trying to do it by yourself is going to end in failure. You're going to need an army. Really, the best the ground up than the top down. There are a lot less things in the way. And then finally, I want to, as you go through all of this, I want to talk about something relatively important to be mindful of. And this was a concept brought to me by Jessica Hall, the VP of product over at 3Pillar, and she turned me on to this guy, Bob Sutton, who has what he calls the toxic tandem. And the toxic tandem, I'll paraphrase, goes like this. The higher up in an organization you are, the more everyone pays attention to you, and the less you see. In some regards, it's the management bubble, but it's really critical in a job like this, right? So imagine right now, for anyone who's in a relatively senior sort of role in your company, think about when you came to work this morning. You came to work, you were probably already late for a meeting, you had 6 emails come in your drive to work, you rush in, you throw your coat on your desk, and you run off to the conference room for your first meeting of the day. A lot of times, you probably, as you went into the office, as you climbed the stairs, as you were looking at your cell phone in the elevator, you breezed through the lobby, you got up to your office, you missed everyone who saw you on the way in. But I guarantee they all saw you. They all saw you walk through the door. And when you walk through the door, your teams are looking to see if you're in a good mood. They're looking to see if you're in a bad mood. They're looking to see if you're stressed out, if you're happy. They're looking at what you're wearing. They're looking at who you talk to along the way. They are looking at where you're going. They are paying a significant amount of attention. And you want to watch that, especially if you've been called to transform a company, because then it's not just your team. It's you are this magic wizard from the future who has been anointed on high to come in and drive change, and all eyes are on you, I promise. Everything that you do when you walk through the door is going to be heavily, heavily scrutinized. And so you want to watch who's watching you. You want to watch who those promoters are. You want to know who those naysayers are. It's going to be on their faces as you walk by, but you want to be mindful, and you want to make sure that you're setting that good tone. And then finally, I think, I'm a huge open source zealot. I think it was interesting that Satya has made me a fan of Microsoft these days, because I came up in the dark days where they were suppressing open source in a particularly foul way. But Linus Torvalds has always been a great source of inspiration to me. And he had a quote that I just absolutely adore, which is, the innovation this industry talks about is so much bullshit. Anybody can innovate. Don't do this big think different. Screw that, it's meaningless. All the hype is not where the real work is. The real work is in the details. And that's the thing about a transformation job. That's the thing about this kind of work. It's not just that grand North Star. Yeah, you absolutely need to create one. Yes, you absolutely need to get there. But a transformation job is a huge, huge tapestry of very small actions. You need to do a lot of little things here and there across the organization to get change. It's hard work. It's not magic. It's not having a big idea. I think, ideas are really cheap, right? Look, you can do a design thinking session. You can spend $5 on Post-it notes and cover an entire conference room with ideas. Ideas don't create change. Work creates change. And so I think that's why, this is so relevant for me as a quote. It reminds us, the job is not just the ideas. Those are important. You can take other people's ideas. You can take your ideas. The ideas that you have matter less than getting all of the work done in service of the transformation that you're doing. And so I think, with that being said, sort of recapping things, slightly, or sort of restating them, is the innovation that you're looking for has got to be a force multiplier. Is it a significant change, or is it incremental, right? 10% increase, that's just incremental change. That's if you're at a company that actually needs innovation or needs a digital transformation, it means it is very, very late in the day, right? If we're getting the call now, it is very, very late in the day to be making these changes. And 5% better or 12% more awesome is not going to get you that change that you need. You actually need something that is creation of true value, that is a force multiplier. The second is remembering that you are a crazy space wizard from the future. The stuff that you are talking about is going to be weird and foreign and a lot of people are going to look at you like you're absolutely nuts to suggest the things that you're going to suggest. And you need to understand that. It doesn't mean you need to stop. You don't take your foot off the gas. It just means that you're mindful of the distance between where you want to be and where everybody else is, and that you educate them along the way. You need to remember that haters are going to hate. And they're going to come out, and they're going to come out hip deep, and they are going to try and stop you. And there is nothing that you can do to stop them except walk around them, right? Raise your hand, say, anybody who wants to build, come with me. Anybody who doesn't like it, sit where you are. We'll do it without you. And then find that North Star, right? Figure out what the most important thing is. Figure out that rallying cry, and all of those people who raise their hands and want change, tell it to them. Make sure that they understand it. Make sure that they can repeat it, because if they understand it and they can repeat it, they will tell others, and they will find other promoters, other people who want to raise their hands and go on this crazy, crazy journey with you. And then find that permafrost. Of all of these things, I often wonder if that is not the most critical, because finding out what is stopping the change is absolutely key. Is it a cultural problem, right? Has the company been in business for so long that certain norms have stopped all change? Is it a group of people? Is it a group of robber barons in a leadership role who are trying to stop change for their own self-aggrandizement? Right? Is it a set of permafrost because people are scared that they might not be successful in the new world because they don't understand the new tools? You need to find it and break it up, because otherwise it will stop your change in the tracks. And then finally, setting the tone, being a force for good, understanding that you are doing this for the company, you are doing this for people, you are not doing it to them, and understanding that all eyes are going to be on you, and that your actions, your words, your methods are going to be heavily, heavily scrutinized, and being super mindful of that. So that is me sort of pontificating for a fair bit of time. I will pause and have a breath, Scott.
Yes, no, well, what I love about this is it's a couple of things that I observed as you go through this. One, that digital transformation, you didn't talk about technology or anything digital the entire time. That you're really focused on a cultural change, which I think is something that companies and people embarking on digital transformation miss. They think it's about the technology, and it's just not. It's about the humans. And all of your tips, which are a crisp and insightful framing. I mean, I think I've made every single one of these mistakes at some point in my career. So I've come by these lessons honestly, and I can say all of these resonate with me. But when you really put it together, it becomes so crisp and clear that we're talking about a cultural change. We're talking about an organizational shift in how we approach the work. And I think that connection between the work to be done and what innovation's about, and seeing digital transformation as an embracing of, is this an opportunity or a threat? If you will let me the opportunity to help you see it if you give me the opportunity to show you that this is opportunity and not threat, then we can go build some stuff together. If not, burn it with fire, and other provocative statements that you've left us with here. So, and I think that's good, because that is exactly the experience. It's really.
I'm a CTO, and building things is incredibly important to me. It's what I do for a living. But I like to tell folks, they ask me what do I think a CTO does, and my answer that I've developed over the years is that I help companies with pragmatic uses of technology. And that's sort of huge for me. I mean, absolutely, I can, I'm building a lot of stuff here at Fortune. We've got new mobile apps coming out. We're building a new video hub. We're really changing a lot of our technology footprint, but it's not about the technology itself. It's about that what and the why. It's about how do we distribute our content more broadly? How do we find different ways to tell the story? And sort of, again, I go back to that innovation thing, where innovation is for us is not that we have a video portal, or that we have a video hub and a video offering, right? It's innovation, and it aligns to the strategy because it's another way for us to tell our stories. It's another way for us to get the information that our customers need in a method that they can consume it. And you know, the what and the why, vastly more sort of important than the actual thing that you're building.
Yep. Yep. Well, and you know, and I think it's those items like the North Star, when you talk about like what's going to inform people on what to do or how long they should do it, or are going to drive their instincts and their judgment in their tasks when leaders aren't around who understand where we're trying to go, that North Star, that we can seep into those individual decisions, because yes, at the end of the day, it's about getting work done. It's about the million little things that have to happen. That produces the momentum and the transformation that we're talking about, which makes it so interesting that so many companies approach digital transformation as a project.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, you know, years ago, you told me that anything worth building takes a team to build.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's a force multiplier. One person is not a force multiplier. They might be a change agent, but it takes an army, you know, to do something much, much larger.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is great. I did want to just give you a chance to breathe there for a second, Jonathan, and pause. Just as a quick reminder, this webinar is brought to you by 3Pillar Global. We're a company that builds digital products and experiences. We do this in a unique way. We have a product mindset where we really encourage this idea that products are never done, that they are long-term investments, and that mindset drives everything that we do and how we approach the world and how we approach digital product development. We do this through fully integrated cross-functional teams. Jonathan just mentioned one of my statements or philosophies forever has been, you know, the really big stuff requires a team, and actually it requires a team of different craftspeople. And so we have a methodology for creating high-performing, fully integrated teams, and we do this through the full life cycle of services, and with a focus on what the client's business outcomes are. So I think you can see through this, Jonathan, you know, reflects a lot of the values of 3Pillar. He may or may not have had a direct influence on forming those. And certainly we work on perfecting that as part of our offerings here at 3Pillar Global. And one thing that I would add, as we think about digital transformation, or maybe actually, Jonathan, I'll turn this into a question for you, but digital transformation can seem so big, and a lot of clients, we find a lot of clients are asking, or prospects are asking themselves, how do I get started? How does one get this done? What is that project that's going to push us over and suddenly we're going to become digital? So sort of like bringing that down a little bit, how does one get started with digital transformation from your perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, the first order, right? The first thing to do, or how you get started, is figure out why you're there. And I mean that, figure out why you're really, really there. Because it's not to build a new product, or you know, fix an organization. You know, like I said, all of this is really late in the game, and any company that you go to is probably full of really, really smart people. And so the first thing that I ask is, why haven't they done it before? Why now? And why hasn't it been done, right? You know, there's that group of naysayers who said we tried it, and figuring out really why that's happened, and trying to address that first. Like, I mean, that's one of the sort of the first steps for me. The second, and I think, you know, ultimately even more important, is do some incremental change, right? Don't start with that big idea. Start with the situation at hand and make it better. And that's going to do a couple of things for you. The first is it's going to give you a significant more runway, right? If you're improving financial results, if you're improving uptime, if you're improving anything, then the business is going to be in healthier shape, and you're going to have a little bit longer to get the transformation that you need, right? That original time horizon that I talked about. And the second is it's going to build credibility. It's going to build a lot of credibility, and it's going to get you goodwill. And goodwill is underrated, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, going to your earlier point, it allows that those incremental changes can also really help you shake out the neutrals, and either tip them to promoters, or it's just going to reframe the next set of discussions in terms of where you're going from there. I think the start small instead of think big can be really effective in terms of shaking that out and being able to do some of the things that you talked about here in this presentation.
Yeah, I think if by the time you get to one of these jobs, you have a bit of a career behind you, and I would say lean on. I know is it Marshall? What got you here won't get you there. I forget his last name. But I would actually tell people to lean on what got them there. So whatever your core skill set is, the thing that you know the most about technically, or from a business point of view, utilize that and make that area better. Because you're going to get a lot of traction. You're a domain expert in that particular area. And that's a good way to sort of set you up for success before you tackle those bigger challenges.
Yeah, it gives you some momentum. We got a question from the audience that I wanted to throw at you, Jonathan, see if we can stump you here. If a negative tone was set trying to force the change, how do you recover and change to a more positive tone?
Yeah, I may or
ever experienced that.
What's that? I may or may not have lived through that, several times. You know what? Apologize and fall on your sword. And and this one's hard for me, like personally. I like to fight, and I love the sort of the challenge of battle. But when somebody repeats back something that you've said, and you see it in the cold light of day, and you realize that it was toxic and unhelpful, then be a grown adult and go apologize and do it publicly. Right? This is these jobs are not about looking awesome or being amazing or being perfect. It's about accomplishing the mission. And if you've done something bad or you've hurt people along the way, you can't sweep it under. You can't say I was doing it for results. I think you have to own it and apologize, because again, set by the worst behavior its leaders will tolerate. And if the first time you get called out for doing something bad, you either sweep it under the rug or you allow it to be swept under the rug, people are going to question your motives from till the end of time, and that's a really sucky place to live.
Yeah. I mean, as I reflect on some of the advice that you gave here, it's an amazing, tricky medicine to take, right? Where you have to have this incredible confidence that the changes we're going to make, even if I don't know which ones they are going to lead us to a better place. I'm not exactly sure how yet, but I need to be deeply empathetic to the ones who can be brought over. But I need to be as genuine as possible, so I stay credible and committed to that change on the ground in the details. But again, I also have to burn out, and step aside all the people that are blocking the change that we need to make to realize this promised land. And that's an incredible set of instincts and intuition to pull that off.
And I think that's you say it really well there, and I think that's the point about owning and apologizing. Mm-hmm. if you have to burn something out with fire, your integrity can never be a question, right?
Right.
You
That's a great point.
can't let your integrity be questioned. That has got to be sacrosanct. Otherwise, you're not going to have the cultural change that you need. You're not going to have the buy-in. That one's really difficult to get over if you get to a place where you're not trusted, right? People have to believe that you are a force for good, and that even if your methods are slightly uncomfortable, that you are there for all of the people.
You can support them through the fear of digital transformation, but if they fear you and the digital transformation, then you lose a lot of your potential to lead them through that. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Let me try another question here. We got a couple more and about 8 minutes left. What's the hardest part of taking a transformation job?
The pressure. You know, the pressure. Look, so I go to I went to the Telegraph, which has 160, or at the time had 163 years of history. I'm here at Fortune, and we're about to turn 90. And so the notion that I got called to help a 90-year-old company leapfrog into the future is pretty huge. And so, understanding like the pressure that comes from the expectation and the honor. And again, like I said, anybody who's getting called for one of these jobs, it's really late in the day. It's really late in the day for a lot of these companies. And so when you've gotten the call, a lot of people have made bets on you. And there aren't a lot of chances left, and so that can lead to a lot of stress, and that's really, really tough. And what I tell myself and I tell everybody is make sure you take care of yourself. If you are not taking care of yourself, then you are not going to be successful. I'm a runner. I get up and run, sort of 5 days a week. So running, riding motorcycles, this is how I unwind, and making sure that I have good support groups and that I have people I can talk to when I need to, and making sure that I have good, healthy, constructive ways to deal with stress are critical. Because these are big jobs, and there's going to be a lot of weight. And if you don't know how to deal with that and to manage it, you're going to fail. And so I think that's the big one.
Yeah, that I think is a really good point, and that advice that is great. Too, you have to maintain it, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. So you're going to need that energy. You're going to have to sustain that in the face of all the challenges. The pressure from above, the fear and expectation and doubt from below, the skepticism. It can be quite a crucible. I got another question here that came in. If your direct executive leadership team manager doesn't support the change, should you find another executive leadership team member or members to support?
Wow,
that's a trap.
That is a trap. Yeah, that's you know what? Yes, absolutely. Look, this is.
I didn't think that's what you would say. That's interesting. Keep going.
This is the former Marine in me. But I accomplished my mission, right? It's if I'm there to do a job, then I'm going to find out how to do the job. And if your executive sponsor is not sort of amenable up to or whatever, I think you need to work to try and educate them. Again, I go back to showing the math. Years ago, I fought famously with my sort of executive sponsor, and I demanded that I was right and I know what I'm doing. And we were at a standstill until I actually walked him through all of the math around my decision, right? Where I laid everything bare in a very transparent sort of way, to sort of get that done. But if that hadn't worked, then yes, it's finding other willing partners. It's finding other sponsors to help carry the message and carry the load. I'll tell you though that no transformation effort will be successful without the executive team being bought in. Those are sort of doomed to fail. But if you can get enough weight, right? If you can find enough promoters in the rest of the executive team, if you can show the math and you can show those victories, right? So what are the smallest things that I can do that are indicative of the direction that I'm heading? And then we've got small victories. And I've partnered with somebody to get some small victories in other areas, and I can show that as proof of concept and proof of progress. Then you go back and you try the education thing again. I mean, these jobs are about entire institutions not moving, and it takes a lot of effort to move a big object. And so, if you're applying pressure in one place and it's not working, apply pressure somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and my take on this is, and it seems encased in the advice that you were just giving, is it's that coalition of the willing, right? So, I mean, you should never only be working with your direct boss anyways on the change you're trying to do, because it is a cultural change. You should be serving multiple masters and connecting the dots and helping them see themselves in the transformation you're trying to affect. And so I think you're right. I think the answer is yes. But you should have already been doing that anyways, right? You want to surround your boss with support. You want to help them build that coalition of the willing that's going to help support them through that. And also realizing that digital transformation being a marathon means that, the current shape of the ELT may be a work in progress, right? That might be something that they're shaking out. They're trying to understand whether your ELT manager is someone that's going to be part of that or not. And there's sort of a pressure test on them. And so trying to support them through that process and identify your other willing partners in the leadership team is only good for the long-term success of digital transformation, to your point.
Yeah, and I'll sort of I'll raise one of the other points that I made, especially with executives to a certain extent, because it applies to them as well. Change can devalue experience.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you're creating a brave new world that members of the executive team have never seen and is weird and freaky and foreign to them, do they have that domain knowledge anymore? You're asking them to go from a place where they may have 20 years experience, 30 years experience. They have an entire set of experience around this one thing that has never changed. And then the day that it becomes different, they have zero experience with that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, we are up on the hour. First of all, thank you, Jonathan. This is really insightful. Even though I've been doing this my whole career, I learned a lot from this, and I hope our audience did as well. To our audience, thank you as well. I see that most of our audience made it all the way to the end, so hopefully that means this was valuable and engaging for you as well. Just a reminder, there is a recording that you'll be receiving within the next couple of days of this webinar, which you can take advantage of in case you missed anything. But otherwise, thank you very much from us here at 3Pillar, and thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody on the line for coming out. It's been great.
Thank you.